downtown Atlanta, Georgia, once sat arguably the most historic yet short-lived sports venue ever built. The Georgia Dome, home to the Atlanta Falcons, is little remembered for its tenants and known better for its endless gauntlet of iconic events, hosting bowl games, Final Fours, Super Bowls, and the largest multi-day sporting event of all, the Olympics, doing so in just 25 years of existence. Join me as we tell the complete story from start to finish of the legendary stadium. My name is Lee Brees, and this is Modern Ruins, Episode 15. The Georgia Dome was fortunate enough to have been a spotlight for the city of Atlanta as one of the little talked about yet most iconic sports venues in the country, but that was only because it was spared from all of the drama that comes from trying to get and retain sports teams in a city with no track record for sports. The year was 1961. Atlanta was a city on the rise, but lacked in one key area of its credibility. There were no professional sports teams. At the time, the city, and in turn the entire southern portion of the United States, were being swept by the civil rights movement, with some handling it better than others. During this time of uncertainty and change, Atlanta needed a vision for its future, and someone with a firm grip to see it to reality, as they were likely to face unprecedented attacks and threats along the way. That's when local businessman Ivan Allen Jr., campaigning for mayor of Atlanta, published a white paper that outlined his plan for economic resurgence, cultural empowerment, and a roadmap to an international presence for the city on the world stage. One of the key aspects to Allen Jr.'s campaign was to bring a sports team to the city. In his first year in office, he announced that a 47-acre site in the Washington-Rawson neighborhood of downtown Atlanta would be where a stadium for a Major League Baseball team would be constructed, but did so without any sports team being committed to play there. In 1964, Allen announced that a team had verbally committed to relocate to the city, provided a completed stadium, and soon afterward, it was leaked that the Milwaukee Braves were the team in question. Legal battles kept the team in Wisconsin until 1966, but the new Atlanta Stadium was scheduled to open in April of 1965. At the time, the NFL and rival AFL were both targeting Atlanta for expansion, with the former intending to add 2 teams by the 1967 season. With the AFL also eyeing the city, however, the NFL decided to move forward a year early, awarding Atlanta a franchise in 1965 in preparation for the 1966 NFL season. In their first decade, the Baby Bird franchise was never able to fly away from the nest, finishing with losing records or at 500, but never making the postseason. Throughout that same time, Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, the home venue for the Falcons and Braves, had proved revolutionary for the city, but in the decades that followed, the winds would change direction as consumer preferences and needs of the city were constantly evolving in the still early days of stadium design. By the 1980s, cookie-cutter, multi-purpose stadiums had slowly fallen out of fan and media interest, with Atlanta city planner Leon Eplin saying that a perfectly round stadium was good for only 2 sports, chariot racing and feeding Christians to the lions, and neither one of those are revenue-producing. The neighborhood in which the stadium was built, Washington-Rawson, had not long ago been a wealthy enclave housing Georgia's governor and other dignitaries. But by the time the stadium was built, it had been on sharp decline, and over the stadium's life had only gotten worse, with no promise of development forthcoming. In addition to these concerns, the Major League Braves, the venue's original tenant, had always maintained very favoring financial terms on their lease, leaving the Falcons with little revenue sources. Citing all these factors, the Falcons owner, Rankin threatened to move the team to Jacksonville or somewhere else if a new facility wasn't built. City and state officials then decided to move forward with plans to replace the only 2-decade-old stadium, starting with a football-only venue for Smith and his flock. Georgia Governor Joe Harris then stepped in and personally negotiated lease terms with Smith for the new stadium, reaching a deal in 1989 for a 20-year lease. Financing for the project then followed and was managed by the Georgia World Congress Center Authority, which is the state-owned manager of the state's convention center and issued tax-exempt bonds. A 2.75% hotel tax was then placed on the city of Atlanta as another source of funding. Because the convention authority was tasked with the process of planning and building the new stadium, it was marketed as an extension of the existing convention center, similar to what was done in Indianapolis with the Hoosier Dome. This kept location options limited to downtown, and specifically next to the already standing Georgia World Congress Center. Clearing the selected site for the new dome wasn't smooth sailing. There were still several structures, mostly churches, that needed to be removed. Landlords were quick to accept settlements with the city and evict tenants, but the congregations weren't going to give up that easy. Despite their efforts, they simply couldn't overpower the amount of public support that had built up for the project, and the city moved forward with their plans. Groundbreaking for the new home of the Falcons took place the day before Thanksgiving on November 22, 1989, and construction continued for 33 months. NFL owners, filled with excitement for the league's newest and innovative venue, couldn't wait to see it open. Only 7 months into construction, they voted to award Super Bowl 28 to the city of Atlanta and their sparkling, soon-to-be-finished stadium. The new Georgia Dome would be welcomed to its new home with unrivaled fanfare known as Roam the Dome. Held across several days in mid-August 1992, parades and performances from marching bands and other non-sports entertainment brought in 230,000 spectators for the stadium's cold opening. 1 week later, the Falcons broke in the field's new AstroTurf, defeating fellow foul the Philadelphia Eagles in a preseason matchup in front of a packed house of 66,000 fans. Upon opening, the new stadium was the world's largest rigid cable-supported dome, marked by its distinctive roof structure covered in Teflon-coated fiberglass. The final cost was $214 million, making it one of the largest state-funded projects in Georgia's history. The final capacity was an astounding 71,000 fans for football and near 80,000 for concerts, making it one of the highest capacity professional venues in the United States. The new venue was truly ahead of its time. On the cusp of a building boom of stadiums and arenas, Georgia Dome's amenities included an astounding 171 luxury suites, more than 5,700 club seats, 4 specialty restaurants and bars, and 407 concession stands, yet only 12 escalators and 9 elevators. That's 6,000 people per escalator. You might think that the South's love of football fueled the desire for such a large and momentous venue, but in reality, officials from Atlanta and proponents of its sports community saw something larger on the horizon: the Olympics. We'll cover the 1996 Summer Olympics in another video, but the story of how Atlanta was able to top the largest cities in the world for the Games is really quite an extraordinary one. A month after opening, the Georgia Dome hosted its first concert to celebrate the new stadium and the upcoming Centennial Summer Olympic Games, called the Olympic Flag Jam. Nearly a dozen different artists, including the likes of Whitney Houston, James Brown, Travis Tritt, and Santana, came together to celebrate the city's crowning achievement and the opening of its grandest venue. President George H.W. Bush spoke at the event saying, quote, "Look at this wonderful new dome. What a metaphor for this region's can-do spirit." Unfortunately for the stadium's predominant tenant, the Falcons, things didn't go very well early on, with only one winning season in the venue's first 5 years. Regardless, the Georgia Dome had arguably the best first decade of a sports venue conceivably possible. At only 2 years old, the Georgia Dome welcomed the Cowboys and Bills for a second consecutive championship matchup in Super Bowl 28. The game was broadcasted by NBC with Dick Enberg and Bob Trumpy in the broadcast booth, along with O.J. Simpson and Will McDonough as sideline reporters. Among many other records set, this was the only time in the history of the game that a network broadcasted back-to-back Super Bowls. Nielsen ratings estimated that 90 million viewers tuned in to see the league's newest venue, and a 30-second commercial break ad cost $900,000. Led by quarterbacks Jim Kelly and Troy Aikman, the Bills and Cowboys were meeting in the Super Bowl for the second consecutive year, the only time such succession has occurred. Perhaps more noteworthy, however, was that it was the Bills' 4th consecutive appearance in the big game and had lost all 3 prior matchups. The halftime show, called Rockin' Country Sunday, featured Clint Black, Tanya Tucker, Travis Tritt, and Winona Judd, with mother Naomi Judd joining in. The Bills led 13-6 at the break but went scoreless in the second half, Dallas handing a second consecutive loss to the Bills, who now had the new identity of a team that lost 4 consecutive Super Bowls. Now that the 2-year-old Georgia Dome had hosted the world's most watched single-day sporting event, the only thing bigger that was left was the world's largest multi-day sporting event, in which it would host just 2 years later. While Atlanta was bidding for the Olympics at a similar time frame to construction of the Georgia Dome, they don't exactly line up, and even if they had, it's not certain whether the stadium would have had an altered design to accommodate Olympic events, most notably track and field and the opening and closing ceremonies, which needed a playing area larger than the dome itself and would require an additional brand new venue. During the games themselves, Georgia Dome's playing surface was split in half. This allowed for separate events to happen simultaneously, with the stadium hosting artistic gymnastics and handball on one side and basketball on the other. Li Xiaoshuang and Lilia Podkopayeva would be the overall champions in gymnastics, and the United States would win handily in both men and women's basketball. 2 months after the closing ceremony of the Centennial Summer Olympic Games, NFL owners, very satisfied with both the 1994 Super Bowl and Atlanta's astounding achievement of hosting the Olympics, awarded the city and the Georgia Dome with Super Bowl 34. Before the big game, however, a winning Falcons team hatched, and the new Dirty Bird Falcons came out of nowhere in the 1998 NFL season to have the greatest year the team ever had. Led by Coach Dan Reeves, quarterback Chris Chandler, and running back Jamal Anderson, the Falcons broke long-standing losing streaks and finished with a 14-2 record. The Falcons had 2 narrow wins in the playoffs, making it to Super Bowl 33, but lost to the defending champion Denver Broncos 34-19. 1 year later, Super Bowl 34 brought the big game back to the Georgia Dome for the second time in 6 years. It featured the greatest show on turf in the St. Louis Rams and the Tennessee Titans in their second year with said name and 4th season in Nashville. Leading up to the game, Atlanta was hit with several ice storms, to which they had little to no infrastructure to handle such occurrences. Regardless, street crews kept ice off roads and public transportation kept running during the week of the Super Bowl. Super Bowl 34 was broadcast by ABC with Al Michaels and Boomer Esiason in the broadcast booth, with Leslie Visser and Lynn Swann serving as sideline reporters. 88.5 million people globally were estimated to have watched the first Super Bowl broadcasted in high definition, with a 30-second commercial break ad costing $1.9 million. This game is often referred to as the .com Super Bowl, given that most of the commercials were done by companies later associated with the .com bubble. The halftime show was produced by Disney and called Tapestry of Nations. The show was inspired by Walt Disney World's Millennium Celebration and had a full symphony orchestra, 80-person choir, and featured singers Phil Collins, Christina Aguilera, Enrique Iglesias, and Toni Braxton, and was narrated by actor Edward James Olmos. The game itself went down as one of the greatest Super Bowls of all time. While the Rams went into the fourth quarter up 16-6, the Titans scored 10 points to tie the game with 2 minutes to go. On the Rams' first play after the kickoff, quarterback Kurt Warner threw a 73-yard touchdown to Isaac Bruce, and after the extra point, the Rams had a 7-point lead with under 2 minutes remaining. The Titans then got down to the Rams' 10-yard line with only 5 seconds to go. On the game's final play, Titans quarterback Steve McNair threw a 5-yard pass to Kevin Dyson. Rams linebacker Mike Jones then tackled Dyson only a few yards outside the end zone. Despite reaching the farthest arm length Dyson has ever done before, officials still marked him short of the goal line, and with zeros on the clock, the game was over. The iconic play went on to be remembered as 1 yard short, or just the tackle. Being an indoor venue, the Georgia Dome was capable of hosting other indoor sporting events, most notably the NCAA Final Four Championship, which it would do for the first time in 2002. Per typical, the tournament had its fair share of Cinderella stories, but the 5-seeded Indiana Hoosiers came off a surprise hot streak to make it to the championship game, including a 1-point victory over the Duke Blue Devils in the Sweet 16. This run was particularly noteworthy because of longtime head coach Bobby Knight's heated firing just 2 years prior, and few thought the team would be capable of a championship run after his departure. Nonetheless, the team lost 64-52 to the number 1 seeded Maryland Terrapins, who were playing in their first NCAA championship game. The Georgia Dome was awarded the final matchups again in 2007, with fewer upsets. One of the few things that made this tournament noteworthy was that Florida defeated Ohio State for the national championship in both basketball and football that year. Separate stadiums, though. The Dome hosted its last Final Four in 2013. That tournament was special because in the end, all records of it were erased as the champion Louisville had their entire tournament run vacated by the NCAA after it was found out that for half a decade, the school's director of basketball operations had been paying a sex worker to hold parties for current and prospective players. While that was the last Final Four in Atlanta during the Dome era, it hosted several semifinal and regional rounds over the years. In addition, countless other events would come to the Georgia Dome. Most notably, it was the annual host to the Southeastern Conference Football Championship and the Chick-fil-A Bowl, Atlanta's annual bowl game. The 2005 Sugar Bowl was also relocated to the Dome due to Hurricane Katrina striking the city of New Orleans. The 2008 SEC Championship game between the top-ranked Alabama Crimson Tide and the second-ranked Florida Gators, featuring Heisman Trophy winner Tim Tebow, would end up being the stadium's most attended event, with a shoulder-to-shoulder, standing-room-only crowd of nearly 81,000 fans, well over max capacity. The Atlanta Hawks of the NBA briefly played at the Georgia Dome while their new Phillips Arena was under construction. During their stay from 1997 to 1999, the stadium would actually be host to the then most attended NBA game in history on March 27, 1998, when Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls came to town in Jordan's last matchup with the Hawks before retiring. In the late 2000s, soccer matches became another use for the stadium, with near full capacity attendance, and hosted 8 matches total. The Georgia Dome was actually one of the venues solicited for the United States' bid to host the 2022 World Cup, but the tournament was awarded to Qatar. Wrestling would also be a frequent event, as WrestleMania 27 and corresponding convention were held in the Dome in 2011, as the WWE also hosted 4 separate editions of Monday Night Raw there from 1999 to 2001. In addition, the WCW hosted Monday Nitro at the stadium in 1998 and 1999. Other recurring events and tournaments at the Georgia Dome included the 2003 Women's Final Four, the Celebration Bowl, the SEC and ACC men's basketball tournaments, and the Drum Corps International Southeastern Championship. With all these events, the stadium really didn't have room for multiple tenants, as Georgia State, who was the second longest user only to the Falcons, played their home games there only from 2010 to 2016. As far as concerts go, the venue proved to not be so popular among the Times major stars, but then again, there's only so many acts that could sell out a football stadium. After the Olympic Flag Jam, U2 was the first headline act to play the Dome on their Zoo TV tour on September 25, 1992, bringing in over 52,000 spectators. While all these countless events were going on, the Georgia World Congress Center Authority didn't sleep on their cash cow that was the Georgia Dome, and in 2006 announced a series of cosmetic changes and technological upgrades, combining for a total $300 million renovation. Premium seating was upgraded for the 2007 NFL season, in addition to converting several existing suites into super suites and creation of a premium owners club. In 2008, the stadium changed its iconic teal and maroon color scheme to red, black, and silver to match the Falcons' colors. This included a long overdue replacement of the venue's teal seating, which was replaced with alternating red and black seats. In 2009, large video screens replaced the old and sat on top of either end zone, enhancing the in-game fan experience significantly. One aspect of the stadium that no renovation was going to fix was its roof. Only 3 years after opening, a violent storm occurred during a Falcons preseason game. Winds were so intense that the roof could be seen swaying during play. Only hours after it was over, a hole was torn open, violently dumping water and debris from the roof structure into the stadium, smashing seats and breaking concrete. The roof was able to be repaired in a way that would prevent this from happening again, but managers and event officials took notice that the dome was vulnerable to breaking. In March 2008, Alabama and Mississippi State were playing in the quarterfinals of the SEC tournament when a tornado ripped open 2 separate holes in the roof fabric. Officials let the game finish but delayed all other contests, which eventually were moved to the Alexander Memorial Coliseum on Georgia Tech's campus. Despite these events, the Georgia World Congress Center Authority and the Falcons' new owner, Arthur Blank, still regarded the stadium as one of the best venues in the nation, which no one disputed. Arthur Blank was one of the co-founders of yet another locally based Fortune 500 company, Home Depot. He had purchased the Falcons in 2002, promising to bring the Super Bowl back to the Georgia Dome and bring about considerable stadium upgrades. Blank put all of his chips in the city's bid for the 2009 Super Bowl, but the game was awarded to Tampa. As a result, Blank backed off his plans for renovating the Georgia Dome, which the Convention Authority picked up. One of the first things Blank did do, however, was strategically lower prices, which led to the Falcons' first sold-out season in 2 decades. As previously stated, they did eventually make updates to the decade-and-a-half-old Georgia Dome, but despite its renowned reputation, relatively low age, and recent renovation, Arthur Blank saw the new venues popping up across the country, like the recently opened Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis and MetLife Stadium in the Meadowlands, and saw that a new generation in stadium design was emerging. He then began to question if the Dome was really going to be able to easily secure the events it was used to hosting going forward. Another source of fuel for moving on from the facility was that Atlanta wasn't a particularly cold climate, so the Falcons had longed for an open-air venue or something similar that allowed them to play outdoors. This desire was magnified by not only the fact that the Georgia Dome was enclosed, but also had no sources of natural light, and you may as well have been playing in a basement. It was because of these reasons that renovating the current stadium wasn't going to be a fitting solution. Perhaps an even larger motivation for the Falcons organization to play in a new venue was that they had no financial or physical control of the Dome, and it seemed at least that most franchises typically had both. This hampered their ability to be competitive, and lack of this financial resource is actually theorized as one of the reasons the team had such long-lasting subpar performance. Arthur Blank was serious about bringing the Super Bowl back to Atlanta and was fully committed to the notion that the NFL would not consider the city again without a new venue, regardless of its age and status. He then approached the Georgia World Congress Center Authority with his initial plan for a new venue, which was to build a brand new state-of-the-art stadium and keep both. The new venue would be home for the Falcons, while the Dome would be reserved for non-football events. Architectural firm Populous released comprehensive plans for the new stadium in February 2011, with an early price estimate of $700 million for an expandable 71,000-seat stadium. However, a little over a year later, they updated that figure to $950 million, and with additional infrastructure improvements, the total cost was likely to top $1 billion, which at the time was unprecedented. On December 10, 2012, with a unanimous decision, the Convention Authority approved early blueprints and legal agreements for the new stadium, and it was now official that the only 2-decade-old Georgia Dome was going to be replaced. In March 2013, the location directly south of the Georgia Dome was selected for the new stadium, with several local churches and structures of note to be demolished. With the stadium being built downtown while the Convention Authority had since moved out, the city of Atlanta was the lone public contributor to the new stadium, with the council approving a maximum $200 million towards construction from hotel tax dollars, and also signing off on a long-term agreement to manage and pay maintenance at the new facility through 2050. Both the city and the state, however, made improvements to parking and infrastructure around the stadium, and those projects are estimated to have cost over $700 million. The NFL would grant a loan to the Falcons that was equal to what the city contributed, but at this point, not even half the stadium had been paid for. Naming rights and seat license fees would contribute a significant amount of what remained, with Arthur Blank covering the rest. The final design of the new stadium featured a concrete grandstand interior with an outer metal and plastic shell. The most complicated aspect of construction was the never-before-seen retractable roof that had 8 separate panels that all had to be specifically timed to function properly, and in turn caused massive delays, with the roof not being fully functional until a year after the new stadium opened. Legal debates, however, regarding the public bonds being issued delayed groundbreaking until May 2014, and construction lasted for almost 3.5 years. Personal seat license fees ended up contributing $273 million towards financing construction. The private contract between the Convention Authority and automaker Mercedes-Benz was not publicly disclosed, but Sports Business Daily later leaked that the deal was estimated to be worth around $324 million. This meant that before Arthur Blank could even grab his checkbook, $800 million had already been secured, with $600 million coming from private sources. In November 2016, the Falcons' parent organization revealed that they had secured more than $900 million in corporate sponsorships. However, this was the total amount from all the contracts that had been signed, spanning from a single season to multi-decade deals, and just like the naming rights agreement, it wasn't necessarily all revenue they were going to see immediately. Regardless, total funding secured now amounted to $1.6 billion, which ended up being the final cost for the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium. While the venue slowly but surely added itself to the Atlanta skyline, event promoters began looking to the new, sparkling, and larger stadium. The deemed inferior Georgia Dome now found itself living in the shadow. With the Dome no longer on the docket for big events it was accustomed to, it finally became most well known for being the home to whom it was originally built for, the Atlanta Falcons football team. The franchise found itself playing in the NFC Championship game in 2012 after its second 13-3 season in 3 years, but fell short. 5 years later, in their final season playing at the Dome, the Falcons finished the season 11-5 and were poised to make a serious playoff run. They went in as the number 2 seed, but with Green Bay defeating number 1 seeded Dallas in the divisional round and Atlanta's victory over Seattle, it would be fitting that no less than the NFC Championship game would be the last football contest held in the 24-year-old Georgia Dome. The game proved no contest, with the Falcons scoring 24 unanswered points in the first half and finished off the Packers 44-21. Falcons team members and fans relished the moment, as 2 decades of history was coming to an end before their very eyes. They then went up against the New England Patriots in the first overtime in Super Bowl history and fell short in what was one of the most heartbreaking losses for a franchise in recent memory. After the final game, a group then issued a petition in which it was submitted to the governor's office to secure the stadium's future and make sure it wouldn't see demolition. The measure, however, only acquired a mere 500 signatures. The convention authority then released a statement saying that maintaining 2 70,000-seat stadiums wasn't going to be financially possible, revealing that by signing the legal agreements back in 2013 for Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the fate of the Georgia Dome had long been sealed. On the weekend of March 4th, 2017, the historic, iconic, and legendary Georgia Dome hosted its final event, a series of back-to-back Monster Jam shows. Shortly afterward, with the playing surface already stripped, offices were vacated and the dome was permanently closed, sitting entirely abandoned. With construction delayed on the new stadium, officials left the Georgia Dome standing until an occupancy permit could be issued, as time was quickly evaporating to complete construction before the beginning of the 2017 NFL season. This ended up not being necessary, however, as Mercedes-Benz Stadium was finished in time. At this point, fixtures and equipment not being reused among other memorabilia were auctioned off, with individuals able to purchase seats in pairs. Demolition of the loading dock and the lower arena bowl took place in August, and on November 20th, 2017, at 7:30 a.m., 25 years and 1 week to the day of groundbreaking, the Georgia Dome was imploded, erasing 25 legendary years in 12 seconds. With a large exclusion zone fenced off for the event, no public viewing area was provided, forcing Atlanta residents and longtime fans of one of the most historic yet short-lived sports venues in the country to find any crack between buildings they could, holding back tears as the Olympics, Super Bowls, Final Fours, and the other countless events flashed through their minds as the dome came down. Construction crews then began sorting through the rubble, with plans to bury the majority of the dome in place. On April 21, 2017, the convention authority announced that Home Depot had purchased naming rights to what was going to become a 13-acre park built on the former Georgia Dome site, revealing it would be called the Home Depot Backyard and essentially would serve as tailgating space for fans before games at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. The park was officially opened on September 11, 2018, with the historical marker now standing as the only physical evidence of the dome's existence. Ground was broken for a new high-rise convention center hotel on May 19, 2021, which sits on a northern portion of the original Georgia Dome. The new hotel is projected to open in January 2024. We're still early in the history of sports venues, and right now, survey says there really aren't too many large-scale venues worth saving, with the ones who attempt to suffering for it. Sure, Georgia Dome still had another 5 to 10 years left before you had to seriously consider replacement, but what makes this stadium unique was that it was in this weird middle ground of old and new venues, with modern amenities, yet old design and layout. From a business perspective, given how much private financing went into Mercedes-Benz Stadium, you really can't complain about replacing the Georgia Dome so soon. From a historical perspective, though, it is kinda sad that it couldn't live out a full life, and I hope that the city has more than just a decorated burial ground in mind as a lasting tribute to the city-changing venue. For now, we'll just have to keep the stories and memories of the legendary venue in our hearts and minds, so that the story of the Georgia Dome can live on forever. And on that note, thank you for watching. Subscribe to LaBreeze TV for more Modern Ruins content. And be sure to comment what modern ruin you'd like us to cover next.